Good afternoon and welcome to the last content session here at the KitPlus Show today. I'm delighted to be joined by my illustrious panel and we're going to talk about the future of broadcasting. So rather than me go and introduce my panel, I'm going to go and ask them to introduce themselves. So Alison, please introduce yourself and your company.
Hi everybody, I'm Alison Pavitt and I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing at Pebble. You may know us as the automation and playout specialist. We were founded in the year 2000, so we've come of age this year. It's coincided with a number of major announcements about new technology platforms and a new direction in terms of getting involved in the IP interconnection space as well with our Pebble Control product, which I think you should not have been able to avoid on all the monitors around the venue. So we'll talk about that again a little bit later on.
Marvellous. And Charlie?
Yep. Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm head of sales at Grabyo across EMEA. So I joined Grabyo at the beginning of the year. We are 8 years old now as a business. Originally started very much in the sort of editing and clipping space, publishing content to real time without sort of the 2-minute delay it might take if you're taking content offline and then re-uploading it again. But more recently, we've moved into live production, so we are creating a full-service production suite within the cloud, bringing together many of the traditional sort of physical components of an OB truck or an MCR and delivering that, so you have a very collaborative and scalable opportunity to create content within the cloud.
And Liam?
Yeah, cool. Hi, I'm Liam Hayter, Senior Solutions Architect at Newtek for the EMEA region. You'll know us mainly as being sort of the originators of the NDI protocol for moving audio and video over IP networks, but also the TriCaster software-defined production systems. We're now starting to expand beyond just local area networks, but also taking audio and video across public internet using NDI, including control, and just sort of starting to sort of break the edges of what production and post are also going to look like when integrated as part of a live production environment.
And last but not least, Raj.
Hi. I'm from MediaProxy. I look after sales in EMEA. We're primarily known for compliance, but we're now moving into monitoring and logging, especially in the cloud. That's it.
Excellent. So, welcome. You now know us all. So what we're going to do to start with is we're going to look at some of the issues in the industry that are linked to our panelists and to their particular sphere of influence in the value chain. So, Alison, I'm going to come to you first. And say that ST2110 installations are hard to implement due to a lack of control and orchestration. So tell me more about Pebble Control.
Thanks, Darren. As I said, the videos about Pebble Control are all around the hall here, and one of the things you might just have seen go through is the visual of the EBU IP adoption pyramid, which shows a clear gap in the connectivity space, and that's really what Pebble Control sets out to address. So every broadcast engineer needs to connect equipment, and in the world of SDI, that's really not that complex. But in the world of IP, there's a lot more involved, and the solutions that are currently available on the market tend to be enterprise-level, bespoke solutions, which are quite difficult to deploy, expensive, and perhaps not suited to those smaller IP islands where customers might be looking to experiment, either to train their staff or to have an OB van or a smaller studio or a smaller playout facility. And that's really where Pebble Control is aimed at. And I know it's an interesting one for us to have gone into, having been famous for being in the playout space, but we're all about interoperability. Our playout solutions are agnostic. We can control any device. We're not allied to any particular vendor. And really, Pebble Control is more of the same. We're leveraging the NMOS standards to connect various diverse IP devices across the broadcast chain. As I said, whether that's in playout or in production, that's really what Pebble Control is setting out to do, to make IP connectivity as simple as SDI.
Marvellous. Okay. So, Charlie, coming over to you, we, as an industry, we've gone from hardware to software, on-prem to cloud, and for some, that journey has been evolutionary, and as a result, some solutions are hybrid, with both on-prem and cloud-based backup. Some new players in the market are truly cloud-native, and so what does that really mean? And tell us more about the cloud-native Grabyo service.
Sure, thanks very much. So I think when it comes to creating something that is truly cloud native, it's understanding the complexities of how you get your content essentially into the cloud, and then ultimately having the reliability and the essentially the power, the server power, the CPU usage to really process that many live streams at a single time. So if I go back to where Grabyo started from, we were very much taking sort of single ready-produced feeds, bringing it into the platform, whether that's RTMP, whether that's HLS, bringing that in and essentially enabling people to edit it live in the cloud without any sort of loss of quality of picture, loss of quality of sound, but also making sure that the stream was completely there to augment. So bring on additional graphics, dress up that feed, and then publish that within sort of 10 to 15 seconds. I think if we didn't have that reliability sort of provided through us, to us through AWS, it would have been a very different product. And in terms of where that takes us to today, the learnings that we had sort of 8 years ago in building such a product very much carried through into live production. So as we look to the new sort of capabilities of NDI5 and things, of the way that we can actually connect with more of a hybrid workflow, bringing sort of people from on-prem into a cloud-based environment and not necessarily relying solely on our sort of cloud interface, but relying on the types of infrastructure and hardware that they've been used to. That's creating new opportunities for the types of broadcasters and production companies we work with. But also the way that we can do everything within the cloud enables, again, broadcasters or even some of the lower tier sort of rights holders and content owners, content producers, to create their content reliably, but most importantly, professionally within the cloud, so that that sort of quality of output looks the same to the viewer as if it was created from an MCR or elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. And Liam, with the issues and expense around ST2110 IP-based solutions, many are turning to NDI that offers the simplicity of SDI with the flexibility of IP. So tell me, where is the sweet spot for NDI in broadcasting?
It's always it's an ongoing chat, this one, actually, that we keep having with a lot of different customers, and I think it stems down to a fear of compression that's happened over the years. Post-production industry has been compressed for a very, very long time. You know, trying to work with uncompressed workflows is quite unwieldy, it's expensive. We map that to IP, it becomes a lot of heavy lifting. And as beautiful as uncompressed can be, I think the sweet spot really in the broadcast side of it is where you need at-scale distribution, predominantly. But also once we start moving towards cloud-based production, where people want to be able to virtualize some services or all services, then using NDI helps that, because now within NDI5, we can move that across the public internet securely. We can build satellite sites, satellite hubs. You know, you can have lightweight studios where you need them and bring those back in. But it's not just about cloud. It's also when we start looking at on-premises virtualization and actually taking that connectivity away from cloud-based servers and start, as I say, linking between peer-to-peer, between your different geographies and different locations. And that really, really lends itself to moving towards that NDI workflow. Final part really on that is also a cost and performance analysis. If you work uncompressed, you can get near zero latency, but your cost and complexity rapidly goes up. And so there are going to be some broadcasters that are going to pick certain services, say, okay, this has to be uncompressed, i.e. live sports with IMAG. But then when you actually start getting down the chain and you're going to start streaming it out, distributing it out, again, you embrace those cloud services, then yeah, it makes sense to actually not worry about the slight amount of latency we introduce so much, and then instead get more cost benefit out of your protocols just by marrying the two together.
Okay, thank you so much. And Raj, content owners are consolidating and the distribution of content is now global. Monitoring of streams, compliance of local laws when distributing global content is now more important than ever. So tell me more about monitoring and compliance and how one service can cover all.
Yeah, from us, if you think in the old days, compliance was recording on VHS tapes, and it's moved from there. We're now not only just the logging tool, we're in the newsroom, in the sports department, we're in the social media, publishing out to social media. So our tool is now, it's stopped being just a compliance logger, it's actually the tool that you need everywhere within the facility. I mean, if you take one of our customers who's just implemented a hybrid system with 2110, 4 pairs of eyes are monitoring 240 channels 24/7. So it's not looking at pictures, but it's actually setting a set of rules up. So all they've got is green screen everywhere. As soon as it goes red, they can log into it and find out what the problem is. So it's gone away from, the traditional, how do you search for this? And now you're monitoring. It's more about monitoring, but it's monitoring everywhere in the workflow, not just this is the output. And that's the critical part, that what we're offering is a solution that's not just compliance logging. This can monitor everywhere in your workflow. Another thing we've done really good for the Olympics was we actually did 10-bit HDR in the cloud. Now, very expensive, but the customer had their own cloud. For us to then be able to monitor 200 channels in the cloud of all their Olympic feeds. So that's the sort of stuff we're at. So it's moved on, as I say, from basic, let's log on a tape, to now this is the one tool for everyone.
Super. Okay, well, thanks. I mean, we've touched on quite a few things there that are trending, if that's the right term, in the broadcast industry right now. So let's get our crystal balls out and let's ask our panel some questions that require a little bit more thought around what they think is going to happen in the future. So I'm going to ask you to answer this in linear fashion again, if that's okay, starting with you, Alison. So I'm gonna save the first question till last, actually, and I'm going to start with, in the future, where do you see the divide between hardware and software?
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, obviously, we're a software company, and so although we do ship servers for our systems, we're all about software. One of the most interesting points to me about the difference between hardware and software is giving up your dedicated panel when you're using something. People like the comfort of pressing a button that actually makes a click, potentially, rather than using a software panel. Of course, we do have software panels, but there is still a demand for that. And funny enough, talking to a friend yesterday about who was trying to listen to the radio in her kitchen on her Alexa, which wouldn't behave, and then trying her whatever, the next Sonos, I think, that wouldn't behave. And I said, had you thought about just putting a radio in there and pressing the on button? And she was like, oh, yeah. And that is absolutely the right thing. And I think, I think that's almost where one of the boundaries lies in the operation, is in the fingers. What do people really want to do? How do they feel most secure? Do you get the same slider experience moving your finger across the screen compared to actually physically holding the thing and understanding how to operate it? So that was the sort of interface that occurred to me when I was looking at that question. Perhaps others have sort of different areas they'd want to explore about hardware and software.
Yeah, so I just build on that. I think it's going to come from two sides. I think one side is the people who are using the hardware. People are so used to things, and if we only look back to beginning of last year, people are used to living their lives and conducting business in such a different way. But then when change is forced upon you, you can adapt. We've all proved that to ourselves, and I think it's going to be the same when it's a case of transitioning from hardware to software. What does the software do? How similar is it to the hardware that you've been using before? It may be a case you need to create a hybrid environment to make the two work for the way that you personally need to make it work for yourself. But also it may be a case of learning from others in the industry. How are people evolving and making things sort of better and easier than actually even hardware before have been sort of enabling them to do? It may have been very restrictive to complete certain tasks with the hardware that was presented to them, or complicated depending on the layout of the equipment itself. You can actually customize that much more personally to individual people on the team with software that creates a much more intuitive and simpler experience for the user. So it's going to come down to the way that people themselves use it and how they adapt to it. And I think that will tell software providers like ourselves and sort of other people in the industry exactly how things need to evolve, and that's what we'll see.
I don't think there's anything that's not touched by software now. Whether it's you're looking at your television, your phone, even what we consider hardware devices are still now FPGAs somewhere inside them, or an ARM chip. The world is becoming that software-defined network place. And I think it's not going to be very long until what we term hardware is really going to be things like your physical network fabric, or the glass of a camera and the lens, the actual screen output, or the sound, the actual speaker driver. Those are really going to probably be the only remaining hardware parts probably within the next 5 years, I think, very rapidly. And software is just underlying. What the trick is going to be unifying that software and actually ensuring greater degrees of interoperability between the different standards, between the different formats, and software is that thing that's going to really help drive that longer term.
For us, I mean, the question should be, are you talking about cloud v on-prem? It's not about hardware and software, because once we start playing in the 4K world and the HDR world, there is a cost. And the cost in the cloud is greater than having it on-prem. So I think users, us vendors, have to give that advice to our customers. Are you prepared to pay to use it on the cloud, or do you want it on-prem? I mean, there's no physical breakdown, because at the end of the day, you're still running software on hardware, whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. Yeah?
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your views there. On to the next question. And they're kind of linked anyway, but I mean, during the last 18 months, IABM came up with the term COVID quality, which viewers got used to. Is this a trend for good enough television? As in, traditionally we've been a 5/9s industry, right? We're 5/9s about quality of delivery and service. And I guess I'm asking, do viewers really care about that anymore, given the change in terms of content owners and the direct-to-consumer models that content owners have access to? And how does that fundamentally change, I guess, the way that you're developing your products and services yourselves for your own customers?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think from a viewer perspective, which is ultimately who we're all trying to please, I guess, I think it depends on the format. So, I've been quite comforted seeing the COVID experts library or wacky wallpaper every 9 o'clock on Sunday morning in the Andrew Marr show. I quite look forward to seeing them. I think it's quite grounding, to see these people in their home environments. And I think in a news or a kind of a magazine format, I think it's kind of okay still. It wears a bit thin, but it's kind of okay. But there are clearly formats where good enough won't do, sort of all the high value drama programming and sports and so on. I think we do need to have a different set of standards there. I think in terms of relating it back to what we do, I mean, the main point, there just needs to be a picture. You just need to know that the thing's playing out, and that's really what's important. Content, certainly over the past 18 months, it's the message and the content and the information that's been most important, not necessarily, the picture quality, certainly as far as news and current affairs is concerned. But yes, I think it might well have shifted things permanently. I think that, certainly from a sustainability point of view, why does everybody always need to be in the studio? They don't. It's what they've got to say that's more important. And if you get better people as a result of not restricting them to being there in person to comment on things, then that's a good thing, right? You get a better quality of output then. So I think, there is a place for it to continue for us to be a little bit more relaxed about that kind of thing.
I definitely agree. I think the format of the content kind of underpin everything here. If you're talking about sort of how viewers have adapted over the last 18 months, their expectation levels and understanding of how content is produced has changed massively. And I think they understand what a Zoom call looks like and accept that. They're having calls with their family, or used to having calls with their family sort of day in, week in, whatever it might be. But then when you come to sort of content being served to them, I mean, we do a lot in the sports space, for example, and the way that sports organizations have connected with their fan bases through equivalents to Zoom calls and things, but just making it a bit more dynamic, applying a few more graphics to it and making it sort of still present what that sports club stands for, but at the same time using the basic picture quality that's kind of the same as a Zoom call, and delivering that over a live stream, or even to some extent linear channels. If you look at sort of the way some of the broadcasters have brought in pundits from home, it's still over some webcams or even mobile phone cameras. So I think there has been that shift in the way that the viewer accepts that level of content, but it does depend on the format. You couldn't you couldn't shoot a Premier League football match on a mobile phone, for example. So, not yet. It's down to acceptance levels of the viewer. But I think we're more understanding of the complexity of creating content because we've had to do so much more of it ourselves over the last 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on all those sort of points so far. I think that I would say that mobile tools and video conference tools are going to be here to stay and actually form part of that kind of output and content now. They're becoming just another tool in the arsenal of live production. There's two interesting things I think that we've seen happen really rapidly. One is the broadcast industry's rapid adoption of video conferencing being acceptable as a tool to go out because there was no other choice. And then it's down to vendors like ourselves to actually build upon those technologies to a point where, okay, how can we make them more efficient? How can we make that closer to the broadcast quality experience with efficiencies like video compression? And I think that trend's only going to continue. I think that's established now. We don't know what the world's going to hold next. You know, we may need to pivot to fully remote again, but having those tools in place means that's easier and quicker than ever. From a viewer perspective, I think audiences for a number of years now, and I think it's been quite recognised in a lot of the sort of the press and some of the research, is that people aren't just viewing on a big screen at home anymore. So we've had this big drive to 4K to sell, well, let's face it, more tellies, and then 8K and then 16K in cinema production. And the audience goes, can I tell the difference between that 4K and the 8K on my TV at home? And am I watching it on the telly anymore, or am I now watching on my iPad and my phone, and this sort of variability of formats that are going out? And I think we have to ask ourselves, like, what is enough in terms of a resolution and actual overall there, and try and live with that? And then how can we just, as I say, make that more efficient on all counts, video conferencing, remote, and then in terms of overall delivery, longer term?
From our perspective, well, personally speaking, as an old guy, TV, as a viewer, it's about watching the big screen. I'm not interested in watching on my phone. But, you know, the up-and-coming generations, they're not interested in the picture quality. They're going to look at it on their phone. So, as Liam said, where do we stop? In terms of, as a vendor, I mean, we've adapted. We've put our monitoring tools now on an iPhone app, an Android app, and that's available now. So we've had to adapt to that. But, you know, as a viewer, I think probably most of us are old school, and you want to watch a movie or Netflix on a big screen. You're not going to watch it on a phone. I think that's the question we've got to ask. What level, you know, where are people watching it now?
Well, thank you for sharing those views. I guess, you know, I'd wrap that up by saying our industry has always been very good at spotting where the money is, and also always been very good at driving cost efficiency. So I would say that it's almost genre-based. You know, good enough television probably works for news, dare I say it. Doesn't work for sport, especially if you're pay-per-view, right? Because the experience is where you want it to be. If you're Paramount Pictures, doing content specifically for cinemas, to your point, Raj and Liam, you know, you're not going to skimp on anything like that. So it's going to be, I think, genre-led, yeah? If it's obviously scripted drama, with the advent of Netflix and Amazon, they're putting so much production value into that. I can't see that being good enough television either if you want to compete with those guys.
But also, I mean, I don't know about everyone here, but we're not like the Americans. We don't build our houses around a TV screen. You know, they buy the 75-inch on telly. How far are you going to sit in your living room? Have you got the room to go and sit at the other end of the room? I mean, that's the other thing we've all got to look at. Everyone goes on about, you know, you go to your local retailer and they've got the big telly and they go, oh, why not have this? Where are you going to put it? How are you going to watch it? People don't, I mean, I remember when Sky first did the 3D experiment. I remember an hour after the game had ended, people in the pub still walking around in 3D glasses. Yeah, Joe Public, it's us who care. Joe Public doesn't care. And that's the reality.
Well, I think that's why the question it was there, because it's good, you know, good enough TV, right? Because whatever happened to 3D, and I personally can't get overexcited about 8K and 16K either. You know, why would you? And I know some people would, don't get me wrong, but, you know, is it just us as an industry getting overexcited by these things? Does the viewer really want it?
I think good enough is going to get better, and we're being pushed by a lot of the broadcasters to say, well, we want to do this with Zoom, but we want to do a little bit further. Can you help us sort of build around those sort of platforms that we're using? And as computers get more efficient, back to that software hardware question, as computing power increases and the price drops, you know, the budgets are going to go into actually being more efficient and higher quality and better quality. Just look at what the phone does. I mean, the fact you could shoot 4K on a mobile phone today with a sensor that's as good as almost any large sensor camera was almost unheard of. But that's all going to continue, and that trend's going to go on, and that good enough is going to eventually get back to where we were, I think, just using those remote tools in order to deliver it instead. So.
And I'd argue, I think there's a sense that storytelling is far more important than actual picture quality. If you're going to engage your viewers and retain your viewers, yes, you want the aesthetics, the display to match their expectations. But unless you engage them, unless you tell the story that they want to see in a way they want to see it, then they're going to disengage and switch channels or switch devices.
It's quite a good lesson, really, isn't it? Taking us back to content, which is really what it's all about, storytelling, and that's what's got to sit at the heart of everything, hasn't it? Rather than necessarily the technology that's delivering it. So. It's been a good lesson, yeah. And good enough has got better already. You know, I think since the start of the pandemic, there's definitely, people are lighting themselves better. They're using better cameras. You know, things are definitely stepping up anyway. So.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that was part of the thinking that Al Jazeera did when they started to, record on iPhone their news stories, because they wanted to be first with the story. The quality was secondary to being first with the story. So absolutely. Okay, well, thanks very much for that, guys. That was interesting. Just kind of similar theme, I guess. But, there's been a lot in the press recently about a lot of new studio builds and investment here in the UK. Just a question, really, to see if that affects your business in any way, and whether it's good for business for you guys, or whether that's a different part of the industry and therefore doesn't really make much difference to you.
Well, I think it's all one industry. I mean, I think any area of the industry that's growing has got to be good for all of us. It's just a question of figuring out exactly how we link to that. So obviously we're traditionally at the play-out end, so the more content may lead to more channels, may lead to more demand for control of those channels, and so ultimately, yes, that can be a good thing. And as I said before, the Pebble control tool would have an application in studios because if they're IP, then absolutely it's relevant to us. But I think it's so exciting, to be part of an industry that's really thriving at the moment, and and the economy in the UK with all of these new announcements coming up. I think it's fantastic news for all of us, and we just need to understand how we monetize and exploit those opportunities that proliferation of content is bringing our way. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's also exciting to see the intentions, the plans of people in the industry to do more. If they're investing heavily in sort of creating more production studios or sort of investing more in sort of physical space, then they clearly have ideas. They've got intentions of where they want to take their own sort of content generation and what they can do for different players in the industry. I think if we look at the way that content has been served to us for the last sort of 20 or 30 years, we're now evolving. Content is coming to us in so many different more shapes and forms, and I think where the last 18 months, again, we've basically lived a life of video. So people are clearly looking at how they can leverage the fact that people are interested in seeing more content. How can that get delivered to them? So to Alison's point, I think we're there definitely. It's about understanding how people are actually trying to deliver that to us and how we can fit into their world. But then it's a case of time. It's a case of time will tell us how they evolve their businesses and how we evolve our infrastructure and our software to suit their needs.
Yeah, more studios coming online is only a good thing. Again, it's just more content being generated, as you all say, and we've got more stories getting out there. I think long term for us as a business as well, it's like how are you going to start linking those different studios? How are you going to cause collaboration between those sites? We've certainly got people in, say, corporate industry where we're talking about AV estates where you'll have a main production office and then small satellite studios that come off that, and then we link those with IP. And it'd be nice to see the sort of the film and the TV production studios start taking the same sort of approach. There's a lot of very closed virtualized studios going on and extended reality studios where you go into the box and do your production. But so I think for me, it's the exciting part is when we start growing out of that into that sort of satellite mentality and, sort of a modern OB, as it were, I think.
For us, like Alison said, we're at the other end of the business, the other end of the broadcast chain. So it doesn't affect us in that way directly, but indirectly, I think our tools can now be used for monitoring what users are sending up to the cloud and coming back down. But also just the number of channels that are rising now. It's not all subscription-based. I mean, I think there's that model, but I think more and more it'll be linear play-out still. So the opportunity for us as Ofcom have moved in and are deciding what to do about subscription-based play-out. So we'll get more involved there. So for us, it's good news.
Good. Well, I'm pleased that it's generally seen as very positive. So if we take a look at the trend at the moment in terms of the consolidation amongst the content owners and the drive for direct-to-consumer and the drive to have global subscription audiences through Disney Plus or Apple TV or Amazon or whichever, Hulu, whichever, HBO Max, whichever is your service of choice, those guys have quite aggressive business models in terms of subscriber growth, but also revenue growth in order to pay back that investment in all of the content that they're currently paying to produce with exceptionally high values. In terms of your personal views, what do you think is the future vision for the greater monetization needed by those content owners to compete on that global scale?
Little tiny question there, nothing. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? From our perspective, what we've noticed is that the traditional broadcast has been banding together to sort of almost try and compete with those big content owners. So you look at BritBox or Salto in France, or I believe there's an offering that's in the US now, which is all of the Korean broadcast, Kuroko or something, which is a pull because of all the K-pop and K-drama culture. So I'm sort of slightly more interested in what the broadcasters do to mitigate against those giants, really, and how they can monetize their content to compete, to stay competing, because to me that's where we're a big industry and we need to stay diverse and we need to thrive. And I think it would be a disaster if it was just a few big players that were actually taking all of the eyeballs. And it's really important for our traditional audiences to understand the value of our traditional customers, really, to understand the value of what they own and look at different ways of getting that content out there. And I think some interesting things happening in that sphere at the moment. So that's my sort of particular area of interest on that question, really.
I'd go sort of back that up and just talk about the value of the audience, knowing the value of your audience and ultimately sort of communicating that to the people that you are trying to monetize. So it may be the audience again, you may be trying to generate subscriptions from them, or it may be brands, you may be trying to sort of essentially fund the content you create through sponsored posts, through overlays, through advertising. Everything is going to come down to what is your revenue stream and what is the best way to make everything balance and cover all your costs and make the type of profits and margin that you intend to make your business succeed. I'd also go back to sort of traditional TV and think of sort of advertising, the role that advertising has played since the birth of commercial TV, really, and the way that sort of commercial channels can then sort of fund the content that they produce. That has massively changed. I mean, Netflix, it's all about product placement in those programs, that they're going to commercialize it beyond the subscription. So it's understanding the ways that you can connect with your audience, how you can connect to the brands that would pay to reach that audience, and then bringing that together in a commercial model that works for your business and makes you a viable option for the future.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to talk about the sort of the finance side of monetizing these things, but from a sort of consumer side of it, these the live streaming channels that are coming together, these conglomerates, the Disneys, the Netflixes, it's very passive drawdown stream content. No, very few of them are actually doing live yet, other than sports perhaps, where there's sports rights going to the likes of Amazon. What I think we are starting to see is a kind of resurgence in public service broadcasting as a result of video conference being used in the last 18 months. The actual ability to contribute and interact as a member of public with the news or with a program. And that engagement with the public, I think, is closer than it ever has been as a result, and I think that can be built on and developed. And again, we know the public broadcasters are looking for greater efficiencies, greater cost savings as a result. But I think we have got a new sort of hook in terms of the medium, certainly in driving demand for public service through that interactivity that we got towards, radio phone-ins. But now we've got the video equivalent, and then how do we start marrying that to production techniques to make that more exciting and bring those audiences back in, because they're not just going to be watching catch-up anymore. They're not just going to be watching a pull-down stream of something already happened hours ago. That's going to live there, but it's just, I think we need to start exploring that a bit more. So.
From my perspective, I mean, it doesn't impact us on compliance and monitoring, but how much can we all afford? Why can't we just buy one service that has all of the subscription channels and then you pick and choose? We were having this discussion the other day within the company. We added up how much people were spending on subscription services. And it's come to a point where most people are now thinking, are we really spending that much? So you want to be able to have one app that has everything, and then you can pick and choose from within that.
Well, I think from a viewer and consumer perspective, that is nirvana, but I'm not sure we would get there. And on that global basis, there's another way you could look at this, I guess. I'd be interested to get your view. Netflix and Apple TV, for example, or maybe not Apple TV, Netflix and Disney Plus, okay? They very clearly have a model for direct-to-consumer global subscribers. You could argue that Apple TV and Amazon are using their television services more as customer loyalty than anything else, and therefore they're not bothered whether their TV service makes money. What they want to do is make their money selling their traditional products and services or their main retail business. That they're using the television in a completely different way. And therefore, if you believe that, or you can kind of subscribe to that view, will the likes of Disney and Netflix ever make money, do you think, given the fact that there's competition out there that can play them at that game and not need to make money? Any views on that?
It's interesting that that theory would mean that Disney and Amazon are using it just as part of their marketing portfolio to drive people to their brand overall. Yeah, I'd discuss marketing.
Yeah, I would almost direct us back to the BT and Sky debate. So if you look at kind of the services they're now selling now, Sky have evolved from being a sort of TV business to offering mobile and broadband and everything else, whereas BT have come from the other side. They've been the telephone business, now selling you broadband and now TV services. And it is very much about investing in the whole picture. So when if BT are buying Champions League rights these days, they're trying to bring in sort of customers there who are buying the TV subscription because that's what they want to watch. But then they'll also buy the broadband, and they'll buy the mobile phone. It's that four-play solution that they're looking for, and that was the business model behind those investments in huge media rights.
I think between these platforms as well, it goes back to what everybody was saying earlier. It's back to the story and the content that's being presented and shown. And I think any of these platforms, okay, maybe the Apple TV and Amazon ones are a bit more like a loyalty one, but at least they're doing some innovative content now from both of those as well. And yeah, it's going to be down to those to sort of how they're going to drive that money coming in by the great content that's going to keep people buying the subscription to stay with it. But how sustainable that is when we've got even more of these platforms launching this year. It's like, okay, well, where are the other stories going to come from? And, it starts getting a bit messy. So.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, what you've just said. I mean, Amazon are going to make TVs now, aren't they? They've announced that. So what have they become? Are they a hardware retailer now, effectively?
Well, I did say that all these questions are interlinked, and hopefully people have started to see how these sessions and these answers are interlinked going forward. Looking at the time, I have to say we've run out of time. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for attending KitPlus. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.